So, hi everybody, my name's SkyMaster097 on YouTube. My friend Flight666 Nico made a video about our dear friend Matt who committed suicide last September, and he already made a video on it. I can put a link to the description. I can put a link in the description below to his video, but I was planning on making mine. I never made it yet. It's several months after the fact, but I must say I feel really guilty about his death because I was with him the night before he died, and I would have never in the world guessed that he was going to commit suicide. We had an Asperger's meeting at the library. At the time, he liked this girl, and this girl didn't like him back and just saw him as a friend. But the same girl went on a few dates with me, and we eventually started in an exclusive relationship. But just like Flight 666 Nico and I, Matt was very troubled, depressed. People didn't accept him, especially girls. It was so hard to find a girlfriend. He wanted, intimacy physically and emotionally with a woman, but could not for the life of him find a decent one. The few he did find were all just really disrespectful and just not good girls for him, but I talked to him the night before I brought him home, and he's like saying, oh, well, you're lucky, girls like you, at least you've had some success, which, to be fair, I have. I just see myself as lucky. I see myself, maybe I tried a little more, but I didn't really see myself as some kind of like player or anything, but compared to him, I felt like one because he highlighted my successes and his failures, and it felt like I was doing so much better than him. But I've had my fair share of frustrations with dating and relationships and all that. But on the way home, we talked about it. I tried to console him. He asked me once in passing if I had ever thought about suicide, and I said no. Or I'm sorry, I did think about it, but I never actually attempted it. Basically, I never felt that either desperate or brave to actually attempt it. Slice my wrist open or whatever. But I would have never guessed that he was suicidal and that he was going to do it either later that night or the next day. So what happened was, there's nothing I could have done to make him feel better. I tried and tried, but I feel like it's really hard for the person who basically is dating a girl that he liked but didn't like him back. How am I going to tell him to feel better? I feel like a jerk, even though it wasn't my decision. The girl chose me over him. I can't control what she does, but regardless, I just let him go home, and like later that night, I went to a female friend's house, help her. She does like selling used goods at a flea market locally, and I was helping her kind of organize stuff. I got a text from Matt saying, ask Corey out. She only sees me as a friend or something, and a sad emoji. And I saw he called and he texted, but I had missed the call and the text because I was busy doing stuff. But when I saw the text, I didn't respond because I'm like, how am I going to respond to that? How feels like no matter what I say, it's not going to make him feel any better. So I stayed up pretty much the whole night at that lady's house helping her out, and then went home. In the evening, the late afternoon, evening of the next day, I get calls from Paul, one of the other guys in our group and friends with him too, freaking out, saying, oh my God, what's the deal? I see people posting rest in peace on his Facebook wall. What happened? Did he kill himself? There was no information. And then later I found out, I think it was either later in that night or the next day, it was confirmed that he had committed suicide. He hung himself in his closet. I guess he just could not take anymore all the frustration and from wanting a relationship and not being able to get one. But I was shocked. I just could not believe it at first. But a few days later was his funeral. We went to the funeral, my mom and we saw some other people from the group, Paul included, and Paul actually, he felt guilty himself because he felt like he should have been there more for him, but he had just moved to Eunice, about an hour and a half away. His wife's grandfather had just left his property. He needed to catch up and maintain stuff, and he was just so busy he couldn't find time to hang out with Matt anymore. And that's how he felt guilty. I felt guilty because, well, first of all, I'm dating the girl that rejected him, that he wanted to date. But I also felt like if I would have only maybe stood and hung out with him longer, or if I could have convinced him not to do it, or I don't know. But nonetheless, I think the big reason, probably the straw that broke the camel's back, the tipping point that tipped him over the edge, was his lack of success with women, and particularly the one girl he liked. They both like comic books and movies and all this stuff. He felt like, oh, why not? Why aren't we good together? But she just saw him as a friend. And later she told me that he was already talking about relationships, just talking on Tinder, haven't even met yet. And I would say that's the one thing I did differently. I went on several dates before I didn't even try anything. I just talked to her, let her go at her own pace, don't do anything to make her feel uncomfortable. I just let it happen naturally without forcing or rushing anything. But I think the biggest thing was his failure with romance. But at the same time, there were other things that were bothering him. He was only 30 years old when he took his own life. He was born in May, so June, July, August, September. He was only 4 months into his 30th year of his life. He had been in the hospital since a few times since last November, not November 2017, but 2016. And I had found out from Paul later that he attempted suicide like 3 times. He tried overdosing on meds. He got caught. They took him to the hospital. They gave him charcoal pills to wash out of his system. I didn't know about those other suicide attempts, but that's why he was in and out of the mental hospital. He was going to therapy every day. His sisters, his mom were doing everything they could to help him. He was really bummed out about not having done enough with his life at 30 years old. I had a similar, I guess you could call it like a mini midlife crisis. I'm like, oh wow, the realization that you're 30 years old and all of your peers around you are either any one of these things: married, have kids, have a steady girlfriend, have a steady job, have a career, have gone all over the place, all over the world. They're doing so much more with their lives than us. And so we feel like, well, what's wrong with us? And that was one big thing he was bummed out about. And specifically, his dream of being a pro wrestler. He tried to be a pro wrestler. For one reason or another, he couldn't do it. Maybe they had enough wrestlers or he wasn't good enough, but they got him to be a referee. He was on a referee. He was touring nonstop for weeks and weeks and weeks, just going all over from Chicago to New York City, all over the country. And I brought him a few times to go drop him off at his trainer's house, sleep over, and leave early the next morning. And I thought that was a very strenuous schedule. He was constantly going places, and I think maybe he could not handle that level of touring and going all over the place, and so he had a breakdown and he had to quit. And I know that must have really felt bad because he wanted so badly to be a wrestler. That was his passion, but he couldn't handle what it took to do it. So that was, I think, the third main reason, or one of the third things he was really bummed out about that I would think contributed to his suicide. I don't know the whole story. I don't know his family that well. I'm sure there's probably a million other reasons he probably did it, but as far as what I could tell, those are the three: lack of success with women, not doing enough with his life at 30, and not being able to fulfill his dream as a wrestler. But anyway, so when I went to the funeral, like I said, I was in disbelief. I couldn't cry. My mind was not ready to even accept that he had taken his life. It was like, this is no way. This is impossible. Never would have guessed. But when I went up to his casket, I saw his bass guitar in front of it on a stand, and that's when I started tearing up. And when I saw him in the casket, I just burst out in tears, uncontrollably. And his parents, his family, like saying, "Oh, don't cry," and I usually don't like to touch dead bodies. I'm really freaked out by dead things. You could probably say I have a little bit of necrophobia, fear of dead things. But because Matt was so dear to me as a friend, he wasn't like my best friend in the world, but we did share some close moments, sharing our struggles with Asperger's and with women and other things. But so he was a good enough friend that I could get over the fact that he was dead. I touched his hand, and he looked like he was sleeping. Just a bit discolored because of lack of oxygen and all that. And his hand was so cold. I mean, granted, objectively speaking, it was room temperature, but to have shaken his hand while he was living, people who are living have blood in them flowing through them that's warm, but when he's dead, it was so cold in comparison. I just could not believe it. I don't think I ever touched a dead person's hands, or at least it's been decades since I've done it. But it was just such a shock. I was just like, a few days ago I shook his hand and he was alive, and now he's cold and dead. It just hit me in like a ton of bricks. But I tried telling his parents, his mom, particularly his sisters, I'm like, I feel so guilty. I was like the last person that he talked to, and they're like, oh, no, he went to the gas station and bought something. But I'm like, I was like the last close, friend, I guess, he ever talked to, and I feel like I could have done something. But they're like, no, but he called, his mom's like, he called me, and he seemed to be just fine. He didn't really want to talk, but he seemed to be okay. And they tell me don't blame myself. Ultimately, it's not my decision. He took his own life. He chose that. But I just, as a friend, as a survivor, I have what's called survivor's guilt. I felt like, wow, if there's only something I could have done to prevent that, if I could have talked to him, if I could have hung out with him. But every answer I could possibly think of, every explanation, they always told me it's not my fault. I don't know if they were just being nice, or if they were just being sincere and saying, that I should not feel guilty no matter what. Because they say I could have hung out with him, talked to him, and then he could have, as soon as I left, killed himself. There's endless possibilities. You never know. But anyway, so his family did tell me something that Matt himself didn't really tell me all that. Well, he told me sometimes, but barely, like once every blue moon. He'd say, thanks for being such a good friend, but it's a shame it took him dying for everybody to tell me, but they kept saying, oh, he valued you, your friendship, he thought you such a good friend, and I'm honored. I mean, for someone like me who doesn't really have very many friends, that means a lot, that I can affect somebody's life in such a way that's so deep, and they actually appreciate my friendship and actually means anything to them. Because sometimes I feel like my life is meaningless and I'm worthless, and nothing I do will ever matter to anybody, you know. And that's just because a lot of times people don't acknowledge that, or they don't say anything or compliment me. That's why whenever they do, it's like, what? It's strange. It's like I'm not used to it. I appreciate the compliment, but I'm so caught off guard from being used to not getting that it feels weird. But I was still honored to have been a part of his life and to have meant a lot to him. And, you know, no one will ever replace him. The Asperger's group will never be the same without him. But nonetheless, more than ever, I felt the need to keep pressing on after his death. Because that, you know, I know it's cliche, but that's what he would have wanted. I don't think it's really good, productive or good to, while it's one thing to grieve and to mourn the loss of a friend, it's not good to give up on life and collect dust forever. I just, you know, I had to keep going. I had to keep going. And if anything, it encouraged me to keep living instead of, well, I read statistics saying that suicide is not contagious, meaning if your friend commits suicide, that makes you want to commit suicide. A lot of people think that. My parents thought that. Other people thought that, but it's not true. For me, it was quite the opposite. I wanted to keep living because I don't want to end up giving up and taking my own life and my loved ones crying for me around my casket. You know, I didn't want that. But I will say that in the months following his death, it pulled us close together, me and Flight 666 Nico. In fact, his mother had just moved and was really down about Matt's death, that she didn't do the usual annual Halloween party. So we chose to do it ourselves. Nico, offered up his apartment, which already had Halloween decorations, and we invited people. About 10 people showed up. It was last minute, but for what it was probably the best it could have ever been, and we had a good time. Then later we had a Christmas party. Me and one of the moms planned it, and Paul and his group started too. So I'd say, not because of his death, but in spite of his death and of Matt's death, we have worked harder and done more to help the Aspies in our community, and the group has gotten better. But again, not because of his death, but in spite of it. But anyway, but it makes me wonder, why did he have to die? Why do, you know, some people, it's like, I wonder how many people, and this is like a rhetorical kind of like open-ended kind of question in my mind, is like, what is it going to take for people to give a shit, to actually care about people who are not accepted? You know, how many people are going to have to take their own life before people start to listen, or people who don't fit in? And with a mass shooting happening every few months in this country, it's just like people want to point to guns or or bad parenting or violent video games or whatever. They want everything else, but they don't. It seems like they're dancing around the true issue, in my opinion, which is social isolation and bullying and social ostracization. 9 out of 10 of these shooters or suicidal people, like they had no friends. They were shunned and rejected, and just their whole lives, not just by the opposite sex, but also by their own peers. They didn't have any friends, and it's just like that until this people start to listen and care and do something about it, these mass shootings are going to keep happening over and over and over, and people are going to continue to kill themselves or do a murder suicide. That may be a bold and controversial statement, but that's my opinion, that it's not going to get better. It's going to keep happening until the source of the problem is resolved. But in any case, that could have been me if maybe I was more suicidal than I have been. If I was having a bad day, that could have been me that would have taken my own life. Nico and I both had the struggles that Matt had. We did struggle with fitting in, making friends, relationships with the opposite sex, fulfilling our dreams, or trying to. We all had those struggles, those issues. But I guess maybe for Matt it was too much for him to bear, and he just took his own life to end his suffering. But right now, Nico and I, we got closer after Matt's death, because it seems like in the absence of one person, we pick up the slack and we become closer. But we still, I will say this, I am in a relationship now with a girl, and she's really nice, and I really love it. But other than that, I'd say Nico and I still struggle with social ostracization, or fitting in, or trying to fulfill our dreams, seeming like it's one step forward, 2 steps back every time we try to do something, whether Nico with his YouTube or his band he's trying to start, or me with some of my ambitions. But we're still struggling. We're still having these issues. But I don't know what made Matt want to take his own life, but he did. And in a weird way, it's a really complex issue, but in a weird way, it's like, well, do I have to respect his decision? I'm not going to call him a coward like some people. I'm not going to call him like taking the easy way out, because I've been there. I've been suicidal. I have never attempted it, but I felt so worthless and so miserable, and so like the world would be better off without me. But again, never attempted it, but I felt like I know how he felt, so I'm not going to call him a coward or taking the easy way out, because that's not true at all. In fact, he had been struggling for months and years. In fact, his whole life, in a way. So it's not like he didn't try, So I don't know. In a way, I wish he hadn't taken his life. I really wish it didn't have to come to that. But in a way, he took his decision. And in a weird way, I guess I have to respect that, but because it's his life. But there's really no clear answer, but just that it's really sad that he's gone, and that's why I made this video, and that's why I wanted to talk about the issues surrounding suicide, that leading up to suicide. But thank you all for listening, and I might make more videos on the subject later, but for now, I just wanted to talk about Matt. And rest in peace, Matt. You were a friend, you were a brother. You'll always be missed.